I think it's really interesting as a culture that we don't have the right stories for the time we're in now. You know, we have endless Hollywood films, and there's just been a new Mad Max film come out. You know, we have all these films about everything going horribly wrong. And if somebody makes a film about everything going horribly wrong, whether it's because of zombies or nuclear bombs or whatever, we all go to the cinema and we like to watch things go horribly wrong. You know, but who makes films about things turning out okay? You know, and who makes the films about people coming together and seeing a problem and responding to it with creativity and compassion and creating something remarkable? We don't make those stories, you know. So we really need those stories, and you know, there's a big campaign now happening globally around this idea of leave it in the ground, with climate scientists saying if we want to stay below 2 degrees, we have to leave 3/4 of all the fossil fuels we already know about, never mind looking for new ones, that we already know about, we have to leave them in the ground. Well, I think that's only going to happen if we have a sufficiently exciting story about what we can create above ground by leaving that underground. So I think we need the stories, but we also need so a lot of what I do is being a storyteller. You know, I go to Brussels, I meet transition people, they say, oh, we're doing this great project, really exciting, great. Then I come to Paris, I tell people, oh, I was just in Brussels, they're doing this, oh, that's really good. And so you kind of, like a bee, you cross-pollinate stories. And I think that's really what kind of sustains and inspires people. So we need the bigger kind of news stories, but we also need just those stories about people like us doing remarkable things.
I think the biggest building block for me is solidarity, because solidarity has two components. The first one is spiritual. It's a belief in something greater than yourself. But the second is economic, and it's the realization that we're economically interconnected. And I think that we need to dust up that word, you know, it's been in the old-fashioned department, and bring it back, because what that does is it lets us look at the earth and climate and all these changes and the food that we eat and see things at a much larger level and how we're connected to all of that. And so I think that's the thing that has to change. And then if I had like a specific thing that I think needs to change, capital flows. I think that when you look at the people who are really trying to transform the world, if they don't have a business model that will scale, they don't get investor money. And I think that there's plenty of things that have perfectly good margins where revenues exceed their expenses, whether it's cooperatives or unions or other kinds of things. And if I were an elected official, I would try to scale those like crazy. And I think a great example is what President Roosevelt did in America in the 1930s, where he said, I want to transform the economy, but I know it can't come from government, it's got to come from unions. So I'm going to let unions exist and be free, and I'm going to help figure out their business model so they can do it on their own. And I think we need those new kinds of institutions and organizations and groups and networks, but they have to have their money, and there has to be capital flows to them, and they have to be independent.
Well, I mean, we're starting to see this new system emerge piece by piece. You know, it hasn't coalesced or crystallized quite yet. I was just in Bologna to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the new regulation for the care and regeneration of the urban commons, and it's a new regulatory platform that empowers citizens to really take care of their city, and is a tangible manifestation of this idea that Michel Bauwens talks about a lot, of the partner state, where the government plays a kind of facilitative role and a coordination role, but citizens on a peer-to-peer basis create the things that they need.
We're moving away from the idea that we're aspiring towards ownership, and that really we're aspiring to access goods, services, and talent. But in many ways, we want ownership, but we don't need, I don't need to own everything. We could co-own a lot of things, but this notion of co-ownership isn't really embraced by capitalist society. It's in many ways actually contrary to capitalism. The laws need to change in terms of this idea of co-owned or ownership in general. What does that mean? I have the right to use this under these circumstances in this way at this time for free or for something. And those kinds of laws, those kinds of social, even in some cases social expectations, need to be rethought. But I believe that much of what we're looking at here comes down to ownership and also relatedly taxation. And if governments could find other ways to capture revenue by creating a different kind of participative society, which I think we're on the cusp of, then a lot of these old models will dissolve because in fact they don't make too much sense anymore.
For me, the key again is creating commons. So what do we need? How can we co-create the response to that need? And so people can freely contribute to commons. Around that commons we create livelihoods, as autonomous as we can. So I call this the ethical entrepreneurial coalition around each commons. Then we have a new type of foundation that we see emerging. I call them for-benefit associations that enable and empower this cooperation to occur. So every commons is usually linked to some kind of foundation, like the Wikimedia Foundation, the Linux Foundation. So this is the microeconomy which is emerging right now. I see this as a model for a whole society. You have a productive civil society, an ethical economy which has internalized ecological and social justice issues, and a partner state which is a collective institution to enable this kind of autonomous creation of commons. So that for me is kind of the answer, and to do that we need to create a consciousness, because a lot of people are doing it but they don't know they're doing it. Just as workers in the 19th century didn't know they were workers. They thought they were displaced farmers.
Well, I think we need new protocols for governance. I think we need institutions for the 21st century. Institutions and political institutions and social institutions, that they're not created in the void. They respond to the technological realities and to the values of their time. And those values and that technological landscape changed, but we haven't changed our governments, we haven't changed our political institutions. And so what we need to do is to rethink, redesign governance, redesign our political institutions. So set up new protocols, rethink representation, rethink political parties, rethink how the government functions, basically. And today we have amazing tools to do that we didn't have before. Not only the internet, but decentralized infrastructure like blockchain that allows us to build new contracts amongst a trusted network of peers, and that's fascinating.
Whoa, that's a complicated one. Create an appendix on the 10 Commandments and then everything is fixed. No, really complicated to know which laws. So we have a lot of protection of the consumer, we have rules for companies, we have rules for all these entities, but we as a citizen producer, we have never been recognized because it was never that simple to be a producer in society. So I think if we recognize this role and we protect it with some regulation, and the other thing is to understand that this is moving so fast that you cannot stick with a certain regulation. It has to be a continuous improvement. So it's not I'm looking for this result, I'm looking for a certain outcome, and then when I have this outcome I will reevaluate and reiterate and maybe regulate again, because I will learn something in the process. If you regulated 4 years ago, it would not fit the situation today. If you regulate today, it will not fit the situation in 4 years. So I think it's a matter of putting the citizen in the center as a producer on one side, and on the other one to be like iterative on the regulation.
Technological infrastructure seems to be a really crucial component to a lot of what we're seeing here. And access to that and the availability of it to a wider population is still something that's very important to consider. An increasing number of people do have access to the internet and do have tools for that, but we use them in different ways, and still there are parts of the population that aren't included in that. So finding ways of making digital technologies a more open and public infrastructure seems quite crucial. But that also doesn't discount people, and people have to come before the technology, because it's what we do with it rather than what is there that will make the difference. So I suppose in that respect, finding ways that people can connect and communicate, and perhaps tools that can help facilitate that, seems quite crucial right now.
We have the human rights, and I don't know whether we need much more than that, or we could just reactualize the human rights that were written in an industrial era. For example, we're learning, all of us, that any citizen can become a real agent, economic, social, and agent of change. But our laws are still made for workers and business people. So we need to empower these people in some sort. We need laws. We have all these copyright issues, and we are discovering that copyright not necessarily or not always fosters innovation. And we need to foster open source for many other things. So I think there are tweaks that we've got. I think humanism has been here for very long, but we need to actualize it to the potential that we have today.
I mean, everything, every single aspect. Reform the political system so that it's more participatory, not just voting. The educational system and the medical system. I mean, everything. I can't really sum that up. I can't say what is the most important thing to start with. Maybe the money system, you know. I mean, I've written about that, and money seems very central to everything else that's happening. And I believe if we change the money system, then everything else would change around it.